The neon sign of the Marigold Pie Diner paints the fog pink. It's a losing battle. Here in Port Harridan, the fog always wins. It rolls off the wharf, thick as wet wool, carrying the smell of low tide, diesel, and the metallic tang of the container yards. It's 2 a.m, which is my morning. I'm Lila Hart, and from midnight until the sun tries to burn through the haze, I'm the one pouring the coffee. The Marigold is an island of flickering, fluorescent light in the dark. The vinyl on the booths is cracked, showing the yellow foam underneath, and the air is a permanent cocktail of old grease, burnt coffee, and the sweet, heavy scent of Mrs. May's apple pies. He didn't walk in so much as materialize out of the mist. He slid into booth 4, the one with the unsteady leg that I keep forgetting to jam a napkin under. He wasn't one of our usuals, not a longshoreman finishing a double, not a trucker fueling up, and definitely not one of the cops who pretended not to see the gambling den 2 blocks over. This man was quiet. He wore a charcoal gray suit that cost more than my car, but he looked exhausted, not just end of a long day tired. This was a deep, bone-weary exhaustion, the kind that settles in your shoulders and hollows out your eyes. His were the color of the harbor just before dawn, cold, deep, and impossible to read. He sat there for a minute, just staring at the menu he wasn't reading. I noticed a small, 3-cornered tear on his lapel, precise and strange. I grabbed the pot, coffee. He nodded, not looking up, black. His voice was rough, like gravel that had been smoothed over by expensive whiskey. I poured the cup, the dark liquid steaming in the damp air. He wrapped his long fingers around the mug, soaking up the warmth. I went back to wiping down the counter. It was a slow night, just me, him, and the sizzle of the empty grill. I was slicing up the last apple pie from the cooling rack. The smell of cinnamon and baked butter was the only good thing in the air. I cut a thick wedge, the crust flaking perfectly. I looked at him. He was just staring into his cup, like he was looking for answers at the bottom. Hell, we all have those nights. I put the slice on a clean plate, slid it onto the counter, and pushed it gently toward his booth. He looked up, and for a second, his eyes weren't cold. They were just surprised. "On the house," I said, forcing a smile. My feet were killing me. "We had extra today." It was a lie. We never have extra pie. He knew it, I knew it, but he nodded. A slow, deliberate motion. "Thank you." He ate the pie slowly, methodically, as if it were the first thing he'd tasted in a week. He finished his coffee, and I refilled it without asking. He didn't say another word. 10 minutes later, he stood up. He left a crisp $100 bill on the table, folded neatly next to the empty plate. I picked it up as he was walking to the door. "Hey, wait," I called out. "This is way too much. The coffee was only $4. He paused at the door, turning his head just enough to look at me over his shoulder. "Keep it?" "But the pie was free," I insisted. "No," he said, his voice quiet but carrying across the empty diner. "It wasn't—" He pushed the door open, and the fog swallowed him. Just like that, he was gone. A charcoal gray ghost. I stared at the $100 bill. It felt heavy in my hand. I didn't know who he was. I didn't know I'd just served apple pie to Ronan Viscari, the man who ran the entire East Coast for the Viscari family, the man they called the Harbor Phantom, because you never saw him coming until it was too late. I just knew I had $100. It was a start. An hour later, my cheap, 5-year-old phone vibrated in my apron pocket. I pulled it out, wiping steam from the cracked screen. A text from my sister, Sarah. "Lila, doctor. Evans called. They need the deposit for Dad's surgery at St. Avalon Community Ward by Friday, or they push him back another month. It's $2,000. I closed my eyes, leaning my forehead against the cool stainless steel of the pie case. Friday. That was 2 days from now. The $100 bill in my pocket suddenly felt like pocket change. I had maybe $300 saved up. I bit my lip until I tasted iron, trying to push down the panic that was crawling up my throat. Just keep moving. Lila, keep pouring the coffee. The bell jingled again. and I braced myself. In stumbled Sal, a dock loader who smelled like cheap gin and fish guts. He wasn't a mean drunk, just a clumsy one with wandering hands. He spotted June, our new intern, sweeping by the kitchen doors. June was barely 18 and scared of her own shadow. "Hey there, little bird," Sal slurred, lurching toward her. He reached out, his hand aiming for her arm. June flinched, backing into the swinging door. I was already moving. I didn't shout. I didn't make a scene. That just makes it worse. I grabbed a glass of ice water from the service station as I passed. "Oh, Sal, watch your step," I chirped, tripping over my own feet. The entire glass of ice water went splashing down the front of his overalls. He roared, jumping back as the ice cubes slid down his shirt. "Hart, what the hell?" "Oh, goodness, Sal, I'm so sorry," I said, my voice dripping with fake concern. I grabbed a wad of bar towels. "Here, let me help you. You're soaked. The floor must be slippery." He grumbled, swatting the towels away. "Forget it. I'm cold." He was sobered up just enough by the shock. He gave June one last blurry look, then stumbled back out into the fog. June was pressed against the wall, breathing hard. "You did that on purpose." I just winked, handing her the broom. "Floors are always slippery. Kid, never forget that." 3 a.m., the dead hour. The bell above the door didn't jingle this time. It slammed open, letting in a blast of cold, wet air that made the coffee cups rattle. 3 men walked in. They weren't here for pie. They wore cheap polyester suits, the kind that pull too tight across the shoulders and always look rumpled. They had bad haircuts and the bored, arrogant expressions of men who have a little bit of power and love to use it. "Lila Hart," the leader asked. He had a clipboard. "That's me. What can I get for you?" "Interstate Integrity Bureau," he said, flashing a laminated ID that looked like it came from a print shop. "We're conducting a spot inspection." Mrs. May, the owner, emerged from the back office, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She's 75, and her hands are twisted with arthritis. But she's tougher than anyone I know. "An inspection?" she asked, her voice thin. "We just had our health inspection last month. We got an A." "This isn't health, ma'am," the leader said, not smiling. "This is integrity. We're checking books, permits, vendor licenses. Last 6 months." He and his 2 goons started moving around the diner like they owned it. One went behind the counter, opening the register. The other started shining a flashlight into the pantry. "Hey," I said, moving to block him. "You can't just go through our stuff." "This is an official audit," the third man said, sniffing a jug of milk. "This looks irregular. This is going to be a steep one." The leader agreed. He pulled a pre-printed form from his clipboard. "We're seeing multiple infractions. We're going to have to shut you down pending a full review." "Mrs.?" May gasped. "Shut us down. You can't. We haven't done anything wrong." "That's what they all say," the leader said, sliding the form and a cheap pen onto the counter. "Sign here. It's just an acknowledgement of the preliminary findings. We'll assess the full penalty amount later." I watched Mrs. May's hand tremble as she reached for the pen. Her face was pale. This diner was her whole life. This was a shakedown. Pure and simple. "Don't sign it," I said. The 3 men turned to look at me. Mrs. May froze. "Excuse me," the leader said. I stepped forward, planting myself between him and Mrs. May. I was terrified. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would break, but I was more angry than scared. I said, "Don't sign it. Mrs. May, where is your warrant?" The man laughed, a short, barking sound. "We don't need a warrant, sweetheart. This is the IUB. We operate under new federal guidelines." "Show me," I said, crossing my arms. My voice was shaking, but I held his gaze. "Show me the statute number, because last I checked, the 4th Amendment still applies in Port Harridan. You can't search this property or seize anything without a court-ordered or signed warrant, and you don't have one." The smile slid off his face. His eyes went flat and cold. "You're interfering with a federal investigation. Girlie, that's a felony." I'm protecting private property from an illegal search. You have no jurisdiction and no warrant. Get out of our diner." He stared at me for a long, heavy moment. The only sound was the drip of the coffee pot and the buzz of the neon sign outside. The air still smelled like cinnamon and butter from the pie I'd given the stranger. But now there was a new smell, something sour and metallic. Outside, the mist had turned into a fine rain, tapping against the glass like tiny metal filings. "You're making a big mistake," the leader said, his voice dropping to a low growl. "A real big one." He snatched the form off the counter. "We'll be back next week with the full team for a comprehensive inspection, and trust me," he pointed the pen at me, "you won't like what we find." They turned as one and marched out. The door slammed shut, leaving the diner in a heavy, vibrating silence. Mrs. May was leaning against the counter, crying silently into her hands. We closed at 4, neither of us saying much. I sent June home, locked the door, and started cleaning booth 4, where the quiet man had been. I picked up the heavy ceramic mug and then the plate. Underneath the plate, right where he'd left the $100 bill, was something else. A business card. It wasn't paper. It felt like thin, pressed metal, and it was matte black. It absorbed the light. There was no name, no company, no address. Just 2 letters embossed in the center arpet. Below them, a single 10-digit phone number. I stared at it. R.V. I thought of the man with the cold eyes and the torn lapel. I slipped the card into the pocket of my jeans, next to the folded $100 bill. It was probably nothing. A rich guy's weird quirk. Just another piece of strange debris washed up on the shores of Port Harridan. I turned off the lights, plunging the marigold into darkness. I had no idea that I wasn't holding a business card. I was holding a marker, a fuse, and I'd just been the one to light it. The next 7 days felt like trying to walk through hardening cement. The air in Port Harridan was thick, heavy with things unsaid. That threat from the fake Interstate Integrity Bureau hung over the marigold like the persistent dockyard fog, seeping into the vinyl of the booths and making the coffee taste stale. I lived and breathed the diner. I took every extra shift Mrs. May would give me covering for the morning girl who called in sick and staying late to close. I was running on caffeine, adrenaline, and pure, uncut fear. The $2,000 for my dad's surgery at St. Avalon's was a mountain I had to climb, and Friday was the peak. Every time my phone buzzed, my stomach would twist, expecting it to be my sister, Sarah, asking for money I didn't have. My world shrank to the clatter of plates, the hiss of the espresso machine, and the crumpled ones. 5s and 10s I stuffed into my apron pocket. I counted them obsessively after every shift. My tips spread out on my tiny kitchen table under a weak 40-watt bulb. It was never enough. A $1 tip felt like a lifeline. A $5 tip felt like a miracle. On Wednesday, during the afternoon lull, a different kind of storm blew in. The diner bell jingled, and I looked up from polishing the pie case, my fake smile ready. The smile died on my lips. It was Milo. Milo was a problem that belonged to my ex-boyfriend, Derek. Derek, who had a smile like a movie star and the impulse control of a toddler. Derek, who had skipped town 3 months ago, leaving behind a string of bad checks, a broken heart, and a $5,000 debt to men you don't borrow from. Milo wasn't the boss. He was the guy the boss sends. He was all cheap cologne, a leather jacket that squeaked, and eyes that were too small and too close together. "Lila, sweetheart," he oozed, sliding onto stool number 3, the same stool the quiet man, R.V., had sat at. The thought made me angry. "Long time no see. You're looking tired." "What do you want, Milo?" I put the cleaning rag down. My hands were steady. I was too exhausted to be polite. "What do I want? I want what's owed. Simple transaction." He picked at a spot on the Formica counter. "Derek's gone. We know that. We also know he spent a lot of that $5,000 on you. Pretty dinners. That necklace you're not wearing. A weekend in the city." "I didn't sign for his loan," I said, my voice low and flat. I'm not responsible for his debts. You need to leave." Milo chuckled. It was a wet, unpleasant sound. "That's not how this works. Lila, see, we figure his collateral is, well, it's you, or more specifically," he gestured around the empty diner, "this real cute, real flammable little place you work at." My blood went cold. "You stay away from here. You stay away from Mrs. May." "That's up to you." He stood up, dropping a grimy business card on the counter. "We're not unreasonable. We'll start you on a payment plan. $500 by Monday, just to show you're serious." He leaned in, and I could smell the stale beer on his breath. "Don't be stupid, Lila. I'd hate for this nice old lady's diner to have an inspection, a real one, with fire codes and everything. Things happen." He smiled, showing a gold tooth, and then he was gone. I threw his card in the trash, but the threat stayed, joining the other one, circling each other in my head like two hungry sharks. The local news was background noise, but I started listening. The Port Harridan Chronicle ran a small, buried story on page 6. Small businesses report aggressive audit tactics. No one was quoted by name. Everyone declined to comment. The whole city was holding its breath, pretending not to see the predators circling. Port Harridan was a town built on hard work, but it survived by knowing when to look the other way, how to bend before it broke. I was counting my tips that night in the back office, my hands shaking so badly I kept dropping the quarters. I was short. I was always going to be short. "Mrs." May put her gnarled hand over mine. "Lila, child, what is it?" I told her. I told her about Milo, about the fake inspectors, about the $2,000 for Dad. The words just spilled out of me in a tired, desperate rush. She listened, her expression growing sad and hard at the same time. "The inspectors, they're not new. Lila, they're just bolder. They're like a sea storm. You can't fight it. You just have to board up the windows and pray it passes." "I can't, Mrs. May," I whispered. "I don't have anything to board the windows with. They're threatening the diner." "And that man, Milo," she sighed. "You can't pay him, child. You'll never stop paying him. And you can't fight those inspectors. We just have to hope." Hope. Hope was a 4-letter word that tasted like ash. I hadn't seen the man with the cold eyes all week. The black metal card was still in my jeans pocket, burning a hole. I'd almost called the number a dozen times, but what would I say? "Thanks for the $100. Can you solve all my problems?" I wasn't that girl. I wasn't a damsel. I was just tired. Saturday night came. The week ended not with a bang, but with a stiff, cold wind that rattled the windows and drove the rain out to sea. The air was sharp and clear. The midnight shift was slow. A couple of truckers at the back booth, arguing over sports, a lonely-looking woman at the counter, nursing a cup of decaf. I was refilling the sugar caddies, my mind a million miles away, calculating interest rates and surgical schedules, when the front door opened, and it didn't close. The bell jingled and jingled and jingled again. I looked up. One man, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, white shirt, black tie. He stepped inside, his polished black shoes making a deliberate click on the linoleum. He moved to the first booth and sat. The door opened again. Another man, same suit, same shoes, same silent, disciplined energy. He took the booth behind the first. Again and again. Click, click, click. They filed in like a silent army, one by one. They didn't talk. They didn't look around. They just entered, took a seat, and faced forward. The two truckers in the back booth stopped arguing, their mouths half open. The woman with the decaf slowly put her cup down. The small diner filled up, every booth, every counter stool except one. 27 men. I counted them. 27 identical black suits, filling my tiny, pie-scented diner with the subtle smell of expensive wool, clean cotton, and something else, something cold and powerful, like ozone before a lightning strike. The diner, usually noisy with chatter and the clatter of plates, was dead silent. All I could hear was the hum of the refrigerator. My heart was beating in my throat. I stood frozen behind the counter, my hand gripping the coffee pot. Then, the door opened one last time. He looked different than he had a week ago. The exhaustion was gone. He wore a simple dark blue wool coat, unbuttoned. His hands were in his pockets. The cold, harbor gray eyes scanned the room, passed over the silent, waiting men, and landed on me. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. It was him, Arkawa. He walked past his men, who sat as still as statues. He slid onto the one empty seat left in the entire diner, stool number 3. He placed a neatly folded white linen handkerchief on the counter. He looked at me, his expression calm, as if he were here every night, as if he hadn't just brought a private army into a pie shop at midnight. "A slice," he said, his voice quiet, but it cut through the silence like a knife, like last week. I couldn't move. My brain was trying to catch up. The quiet man, the card, the army of suits. This was something else. This wasn't a shakedown. This wasn't a lonely, tired man. This was a statement. I swallowed, forcing my hands to work. I got a plate. I cut the pie. My hand perfectly steady. I slid it in front of him. I poured him a coffee. "On the house," I stammered. He looked up at me. "No, I'll be paying." As I stood there, trying to remember how to breathe, a car pulled up outside. A crappy, beige sedan. I recognized it. My stomach dropped. The door of the Marigold swung open, and the leader of the Interstate Integrity Bureau swaggered in, his 2 goons flanking him. "All right, lady," he started, a smug sneer on his face. "We told you we'd be back. Saturday night, just like we—" He stopped. His eyes widened, trying to process the scene. He looked from the first booth to the last. He saw the wall of identical black suits. He saw the 27 men, all slowly turning their heads in unison to look at him. They didn't move. They just watched. The leader's face went from smug to confused to a pale, sickly gray. His goons, who'd been trying to look tough, froze by the door. The man at my counter didn't even turn around. He just picked up his fork and took a small, precise bite of the apple pie. The fake inspector stammered. He took a half step back, bumping into his own man. "We must have the wrong, this is the we'll come back later." They didn't walk out. They scrambled. They fell over each other, trying to get back through the door, as if the hounds of hell were at their heels. The sedan fishtailed as it sped away from the curb. The diner was silent again. Ronan Viscari, I knew his name now. It just clicked into place with the sheer, terrifying power in the room, finished his bite of pie. He sipped his coffee. He looked at me. His gray eyes unreadable. He leaned forward just a fraction, speaking so low that only I could hear him. His voice a smooth, dangerous rumble beneath the hum of the fridge. "You gave me kindness when I needed it. Lila," he said. "I'm returning it." He paused, placing his fork down. With Port Herod in interest, the silence that flooded the diner after the fake inspectors scrambled out was heavier than the fog. It was thick, weighted, and humming with the presence of the 27 silent men in their identical black suits. The truckers and the woman with the decaf had evaporated, leaving their money on the tables without waiting for change. It was just me, the army, and the man at my counter. He picked up his fork and took another bite of pie. He seemed completely unbothered, as if he hadn't just decapitated a threat without raising his voice. I was breathing, but it was shallow. My hands were gripping the edge of the counter, my knuckles white. Ronan Viscari. I knew the name now. The way you know a hurricane's name when it's just offshore. Looked up from his plate. He nodded toward his men. "They'll all have coffee," he said. "Black, and a slice of the pie, if you have it." I stared at him. A slice of, "I don't have 27 slices of pie. Sir, I have maybe 2 pies left in the kitchen. That's 16 slices." He actually smiled, a small, quick lift at the corner of his mouth. "Then 16 slices it is, and coffee for everyone." I was still frozen. "Is Mrs. May here?" he asked, his voice softer. "Mrs. May, who must have been hiding in the office, heard her name. She came out, wiping her hands on her apron, her face pale. Ronan stood up from the stool. He wasn't tall, but he had a density to him. He commanded the space he was in. He walked over to her, stopping a respectful few feet away. "Mrs. May," he said, and his voice was gentle. "My name is Ronan Vascari. My apologies for the crowded house. My associates and I are great admirers of your establishment's baking." "Mrs." May just nodded, her eyes wide. He reached into his coat and pulled out a thick roll of cash. It wasn't sloppy. It was held by a simple silver clip. He peeled off several bills, hundreds. I couldn't count how many. "This is for the coffee, the pie, and the inconvenience," he said, placing the money on the counter by the register. "Please accept it as a gesture of appreciation. We'll call it a 300% tip for the chef." "Mrs." May looked at the money, then at him. She was trembling. "Thank you. Sir, I thank you." "Of course." He turned and walked back to his stool. I watched Mrs. May scoop up the cash and hurry back to the office, locking the door behind her. The men in the booths didn't move. They were waiting. I grabbed the coffee pots, my hands on autopilot. I went from booth to booth, pouring cup after cup of black coffee. The men nodded, their faces polite, but their eyes were all the same. Watchful, empty. They were soldiers. I went back to the kitchen, my heart hammering. 16 slices. I cut them, my hands shaking just a little. I loaded them onto trays and carried them out, setting them down. They ate quickly, efficiently. This wasn't a meal. It was a ritual. When I got back to the counter, Ronan was sipping his coffee. I leaned forward, my voice a low, furious whisper. The adrenaline was burning off, leaving a cold, hard anger in its place. "I appreciate you scaring them off," I said, my voice tight, "but I don't know what you think this is. I don't sell the diner's reputation." He looked up at me, his harbor gray eyes curious. "I don't trade one set of bullies for another," I went on, the words tumbling out. "You can't bring your gang in here. You've cleared the place out. You're scaring away my real customers." He didn't get angry. He didn't laugh. He just watched me, as if I were a puzzle he was figuring out. He set his cup down. "Your real customers are safe," he said, his voice calm. "You're safe." He reached into the breast pocket of his coat. For a second, my heart stopped, but he didn't pull out a weapon. He pulled out a card, not the blank, black metal one. This one was thick, cream-colored cardstock. It just had his name embossed on it, Ronan Vascari, and below it, the Vascari Trust. He slid it across the counter. It stopped right in front of my hands. "No one," he said, his voice dropping so low I had to lean in to hear it, "will ever touch this place again. Not those inspectors. Not that fool, Milo, who's been bothering you. Not anyone." He paused, his eyes holding mine. "From now on, the Marigold Pie Diner is protected. Consider it a statement of fact." My breath hitched. He knew about Milo. Of course he knew. As he pulled his hand back from the card, his wool coat sleeve slid back just an inch. I saw it, a glint of silver at his wrist. It wasn't a watch. It was a heavy, intricate chain, and the clasp was unmistakable. I'd seen it painted on the side of warehouses near the wharf. It was the head of a seagull, wings swept back. The harbor oath, the unspoken, unbreakable promise of the Vascari family. They didn't just run the port, they were the port. I didn't know what to say. I can't pay for this kind of protection." "It's already been paid for," he said simply. Just then, the front door opened again. My stomach clenched. One of the IIB men was back, not the leader, the third one, the one who had been snooping in the pantry. He must have worked up the nerve, or maybe his boss had sent him back to see if the coast was clear. "Look," he started, holding his fake badge up, his voice cracking. "My boss he just wants to talk about the—" Ronan didn't even turn around. He just lifted his chin, a barely perceptible motion. From the booth nearest the door, two of the suits rose. They didn't jump up. They just unfolded, two shadows detaching from the wall. They moved to flank the terrified inspector. One in front, one behind. They were silent. They didn't touch him. They didn't threaten him. They just stood there, occupying his space, cutting off his air. The inspector looked like he'd hit a wall of invisible glass. He was sweating, his eyes darting between the two silent men. He'd come in here trying to be a predator, and in an instant, he'd found himself at the bottom of the food chain. He couldn't move. He looked paralyzed. One of the suits leaned in. "I believe you were leaving," he said. His voice was polite. It was the most terrifyingly polite sound I had ever heard. The inspector nodded, a spastic, jerky motion. He backed out of the door, slowly, until he was on the pavement. The two suits stepped back inside, and the door clicked shut. Silence. Ronan turned his attention back to his empty pie plate. He looked at me. "You never told me," he said, his voice back to that quiet, conversational tone. "How you get the crust like this?" The question was so normal, so out of place, it was like a record scratch in my brain. I stared at him. "What?" "The crust," he repeated. "The first night I was here, it was flaky, but it held the apples. It wasn't soggy. How—" I was reeling from the whiplash. 1 second, silent, lethal intimidation. The next, culinary curiosity. I almost laughed. A hysterical, shaky sound. "The butter," I said, my voice catching. "You have to freeze the butter. Solid, then you shred it into the flour with a cheese grater." His eyebrows lifted, intrigued. "My mom taught me," I continued, the memory coming back sharp and clear. "She said you can't ever touch the butter with your hands. The warmth melts it, and then the crust gets tough. She said you have to respect the butter." A real smile broke across his face. It transformed him. The coldness in his eyes didn't just disappear. It was replaced by a sudden, surprising warmth. "Respect the butter," he said, tasting the words. "I like that. Your mother was a smart woman." "She was," I whispered. That small, shared laugh, that tiny spark of normal, human connection in the middle of this madness, it felt more intimate than a touch. I looked past him, out the window. The rain had stopped. The fog was starting to thin, showing the black, choppy water of the harbor. And I realized something. No sirens. A full-scale intimidation had just taken place. Men had been escorted out. A known crime boss was sitting in a diner with 27 of his soldiers, and there wasn't a single flashing blue light in sight. This was Port Harridan. I was living in the gray. The police weren't coming. They weren't coming for the IIB. And they weren't coming for Ronan Vascari. In this part of the city, the only law was the one that was enforced by the man sitting in front of me. He didn't touch me, and he didn't lean in. He didn't crowd my space. In a life where men like Sal and Milo were always trying to grab, he just sat. He had put himself and his entire formidable organization between me and my problems. It was the most profound act of advocacy I had ever experienced. It was worth more than 1,000 bouquets of roses. His men began to stand one by one, as silent as they had arrived. They left cash on their tables, far too much cash, and filed out. The bell jingled 27 times. Finally, it was just Ronan and me again. He stood, pulling on his wool coat. He walked to the door, and for a second, I thought he was just going to leave. But he paused, his hand on the glass. "Wait," he said, turning back. He walked back to the counter. He reached into his coat pocket again. He pulled out a small, flat, brushed tin box. It looked old. He placed it on the counter between us. "This is for your father." My blood turned to ice water. It was one thing for him to know about Milo. That was the street. This was different. "How?" My voice was barely a whisper. "How do you know about my father?" "It's my business to know who I'm dealing with. Miss Hart," he said, his voice gentle again. "St. Avalon's community ward. Doctor. Evans, the surgery for his eyes." My knees felt weak. I was standing here because of my father. I was working these hours, taking these risks, because of him. I opened the box. My hands were shaking. Inside, on a bed of worn black velvet, wasn't cash. It was a card, a heavy, gold-colored plastic card. It read, "The Aurelius Mercy Fund." "It's not charity," he said, as if reading my mind. "It's assistance. Show it to the billing office at St. Avalon's. They'll understand. The surgery will be scheduled for tomorrow. All costs are covered. 100%. I snapped the box shut. The sound was sharp in the empty diner. I pushed it back across the counter at him. "I can't," I said, my voice thick with a mixture of gratitude and terror. "I can't. I don't know what you expect in return for this." He looked at the box, then at me. He didn't look offended. He looked understanding. "No one becomes poor by giving. Lila," he said, using my first name for the first time. It sounded different in his voice. "And no one becomes weak by accepting protection." "This isn't protection," I argued, my voice shaking. "This is a chain. This is a debt. I'll be tied to you." "You were tied to me the second you gave a stranger a free piece of pie," he said softly. "You just didn't know it. Take the help. Fight the battles you can win. Let your friends fight the ones you can't." "You're not my friend." "No," he agreed. "I'm not." He gently pushed the tin box back to my side of the counter. His fingers didn't touch mine, but I felt the warmth anyway. "Take it." He turned and walked to the door. This time, he stopped and looked back at me, his hand on the glass. The width of the diner separated us, in the window. I could see his reflection layered over the dark, restless waves of the harbor. He was the danger and the safety, the storm and the shelter. My heart did a stupid, painful flip, a skipped beat that hurt. Outside, beyond his reflection, the red warning light on the far channel buoy blinked on, off, on, a warning. He held my gaze for one long, unblinking moment, then he nodded. Once, a final, silent acknowledgement. And just like the first night, he was gone, swallowed by the mist. I was alone in the quiet diner, the air smelling of cinnamon, old coffee, and the cold, sharp scent of power. And in my hand, I was holding a small tin box that felt as heavy as an anchor. I used the Aurelius Mercy Fund card the next morning. I walked into the billing office at St. Avalon's community ward feeling like a complete imposter, my hand shaking as I slid the gold plastic card across the counter. The billing clerk didn't look up. She took the card, swiped it, and her eyebrows shot up to her hairline. She looked at me, then at the screen, then back at me. She didn't ask questions. "Mr. Heart surgery," she said, her voice suddenly crisp and professional, "has been scheduled for tomorrow at 8 a.m. Doctor. Evans will be performing it personally. All outstanding and future costs related to this procedure have been addressed. You'll have no copay." Just like that, addressed, the $2,000 mountain that had been crushing my chest for weeks just vanished. I walked out into the pale morning light feeling dizzy. I was grateful. I was relieved, and I was terrified. The protection Ronan Viscari had placed on the marigold was invisible, but as solid as a steel wall. The week that followed was the quietest the diner had ever been. Even the regular drunks seemed to bypass us. Sensing a change in the air, we had no customers, but we were, for the first time, completely safe. It was a suffocating kind of safety. Mrs. May and I scrubbed the grout, polished the chrome, and reorganized the pantry. We were busy, but we were quiet. The elephant in the room wore 27 identical black suits. Then, 4 days after my dad's successful surgery, the other shoe dropped. It came as a text message to my cheap phone, an unknown number, just a link. My hands were wet. I was washing lettuce. I wiped them on my apron and tapped the link. It was a video, grainy, shaky footage, filmed from across the street through the diner window. It was from Saturday night. It showed Ronan Viscari standing at the counter, handing Mrs. May the thick wad of cash. It showed him sliding the tin box toward me. The audio was muffled, but you could hear his voice. My voice. It looked exactly like what it was a man in a $1,000 coat giving a waitress a box and a stack of cash. It looked like a payoff. It looked like I was on his payroll. My stomach turned to ice. A second text came through. We see you, taking blood money from the Viscari family. The Civic Shield Task Force is cleaning up Port Harridan. We will be releasing this video to the press and the police in 48 hours unless you close the Marigold permanently and get out of town. Civic Shield Task Force. I'd seen their flyers. They were a self-proclaimed citizens' watch group dedicated to fighting corruption and taking back the port. They sounded like heroes. This wasn't a shakedown. This was blackmail. And it was smart. They couldn't hit the diner with muscle, so they were going to hit it with public opinion. They were going to paint me as a Mafia collaborator in a town that was already sick of crime. I'd be a pariah. The Marigold would be finished. I grabbed the black metal card RV from my locker. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely dial the number. He picked up on the second ring. No hello. This is Lila Hart. I know. His voice was calm, unsurprised. They sent you the video. You knew? I've been waiting for it. They're predictable. A pause. They're called the Auric Circle. They're a financial cartel out of the city. They've been trying to muscle their way into the port for a year. I walked into the alley behind the diner, the smell of old grease and salt water stinging my nose. I don't understand. The IEB, the Civic Shield. Different branches of the same snake, Ronan said, his voice flat and hard. The IIB is their street team, muscle for intimidation. The Civic Shield Task Force is their public relations wing. They wrap themselves in the flag, pretend to be reformers, but it's all a front. They're not trying to stop protection rackets. Lila, they're trying to monopolize them. They want to be the only ones collecting. And the video, they want you gone. They want the Marigold. It's a prime piece of warfront property, and they want to control it. They tried muscle. I stopped them. Now they're trying to ruin your reputation so they can seize the diner's assets in the chaos. I leaned against the cold, damp brick wall. So what do? Send your men to talk to them. That's one option, Manhi said. I can make this problem disappear. By morning, I pictured it. Men in black suits, a quiet conversation in an alley, a problem disappearing. And I would be even deeper in his debt. I'd be the girl the Mafia handles problems for. I'd be his... No, I said. A long silence on the other end. No, I repeated, my voice stronger. I'm not going to be a pawn in your war with this Auric Circle. I am not some damsel you get to rescue so you feel good about yourself. This is my life. This is Mrs. May's Diner. They're trying to smear my name, so I'm going to be the one to clear it. Another pause. When he spoke again, his voice had a new texture, a flicker of respect. All right, Lila Hart, he said. How do you want to clean your own mess? They're using lies, I said, thinking fast, the adrenaline clearing my head. So we use the truth. Those IUB guys, they've been shaking down this whole neighborhood, not just us. They must have left a paper trail, receipts, fines, something. They have, he said. I'm going to find it. I'm going to find every piece of paper, every person they threatened. I'm going to build a case, and I'm going to expose them before they can expose me. It's dangerous, he said. So is being in your debt. I'll take my chances with the paperwork. I hung up before he could argue. I went straight to Mrs. May. I told her everything. The blackmail, the Auric Circle, the plan. She didn't flinch. She just went to the back office, took a heavy iron key from her desk, and handed it to me. The storage room, as she said. It's got every piece of paper this diner has generated for the last 20 years. Go dig. I grabbed June, the intern. She was terrified, but she was loyal. We spent the next 10 hours in a tiny windowless room, covered in dust and cobwebs, digging through boxes of old ledgers and receipt books. At 3 a.m, under the weak flicker of a bare bulb, we found it. Lila, look at this, June whispered. It was a receipt from 5 years ago, a carbon copy, Interstate Integrity Bureau. It read, mandatory compliance fee $500. It was signed by the same goon who had threatened us. And there was another one, and another, a quarterly fee. It was a pattern. It was proof. This wasn't an inspection, it was a subscription. We found dozens of them hidden in old tax files. The next evening, a man in a suit that was even more expensive than Ronan's was waiting for me at the diner. Miss Hart, my name is Dominic Russo. I'm with the Vascari Trust's legal department. Mr. Vascari asked me to offer my services. He wasn't a thug. He was a shark in a $3,000 suit. He looked at our pile of dusty receipts, and he smiled. "This is beautiful," and he said, as if I'd handed him a masterpiece. He pulled out a pair of white cotton gloves. "Chain of custody is everything, Miss Hart. We can't go to the Port Harridan police. The Oryx Circle has friends on the force. We are going to build a private case. We will document, notarize, and duplicate every one of these. We are going to build a bomb. And when we're ready, we'll let you be the one to push the button." For 2 days, I lived a double life. Waitress by night, forensic accountant by day, working with Russo to build the case. And then, just when I thought I was in control, Derek showed up. I was walking to my car after my shift. Lila. I turned. My ex-boyfriend was standing there, looking pale and sick. "Derek, what are you doing here?" "Lila, I'm so sorry," he stammered, his hands twisting. "The video, I didn't want to—" "You filmed me," I said, my voice flat. "They made me those men, the ones from the Oryx Circle. They found me. They knew about my debt to Milo. They said they'd clear it, wipe the slate. All I had to do was get that footage of you taking money from Vascari." I looked at the man I used to think I loved, the man who had run out on me, the man who, to save his own skin, had tried to destroy mine, the old Lila, the one who gave out free pie, would have felt pity. I just felt tired. "You made your choice, Derek," I said, walking past him. "Milo's debt is cleared. Good for you." "Lila, wait, please." "Get out of my life," I said, not looking back. I wasn't going to be soft again. The Oryx Circle must have heard I wasn't backing down. They must have known the blackmail hadn't worked. The next night, at 10 p.m., the diner went dark. Not just the lights, everything. The refrigerators, the freezers, the grills, the espresso machine, a sudden, dead silence. "The main breaker misses," May yelled. I ran to the back, but the breaker was fine. I ran outside. The whole block was dark. They'd cut the power line from the pole. "Oh, God, Mrs.," May whispered, her hand at her mouth. "The freezers, all the inventory, the pies, the meat, it'll all be ruined. We'll lose thousands." This was it. They were burning us down without a single match. I called Ronan. I didn't even say hello. "They cut the power." "I know," he said. "Look down the street." A heavy, black van without markings was pulling up. 2 men in dark technician uniforms got out. They weren't from the power company. They popped a panel on the side of the diner, unspooled a thick cable, and a moment later, a low, powerful hum started. The emergency lights flickered on, then the main lights. The refrigerators roared back to life. "A backup generator," I whispered. "It will power the building indefinitely," Ronan's voice said in my ear. "The technicians are also upgrading your internal wiring, installing a system that is harder to tamper with." I knew what that meant. Upgrading, they were saving the frozen food, and they were planning listening devices. An hour later, the generator was humming, the diner was safe, and the technicians were gone. Ronan Vascari walked in. He found me, Mrs., May, and June sitting in a booth, shaking in the aftermath. He didn't say anything. He just went behind the counter. He took out a fresh bag of coffee beans, poured them into our grinder, and started making a pot of coffee. His movements were precise, meticulous. He measured the water. He timed the brew. I watched his hands, the same hands that, I had no doubt, had ordered men to do terrible things, the same hands that controlled the entire port. They were steady, careful, and surprisingly gentle as he poured 4 cups of coffee. He brought the cups to our table. He sat down across from me, the generator humming outside. "They're getting desperate," he said. "And you're bugging my diner," I said, my voice quiet. He sipped his coffee. "I'm installing a better fire alarm," he corrected me. "You call them bugs. I call it insurance. The Auric Circle tried to ruin you. Then they tried to burn your livelihood to the ground. I'm just making sure I hear them when they try again. We sat in the dim light. You're a criminal. I said, it wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact. I am, he admitted, his gray eyes holding mine. I don't pretend I'm not, but there are lines. Lila, my family has principles. You don't hurt children. You don't burn down a small business that's the only thing an old woman has. You don't ruin a good cook just to get a piece of land. He leaned forward. Auric doesn't have lines. They're just greedy, and that makes them sloppy, and it makes them weak. I have principles too, I said, my voice gaining strength. I'm grateful. For my dad, for the generator. But I am not your property. I am not a project. Whatever we do next, I'm not hiding in the kitchen while you fight. He looked at me, a long, assessing gaze. What do you propose? We have the truth, I said, motioning to the boxes of evidence Russo had organized. We can't go to the cops, and we can't beat them in an alley fight, but we can beat them in the light. The light. The public, I said, the idea forming sharp and bright. The Civic Shield Task Force is their strength. They look like the good guys. I'm going to take that away from them. I'm going to be the public face of this. I'll tell my story, and I'll show my proof. They want to paint me as a criminal. I'll show Port Harridan who the real criminals are. A slow smile spread across Ronan's face. It was the smile of a chess master who just saw the board in a whole new way. They want to fight a war of public opinion, he said. All right, we'll give them one. The deal was struck, not with a handshake, but with a shared look of understanding over cold coffee in a diner running on backup power. He would be the shadow. He would provide the resources, the protection, and the legal muscle. But I would be the one to light the match. The next morning, I sat at my tiny kitchen table with a cup of coffee and my laptop. Ronan had his army. I had my story. I created a simple social media profile. No fancy graphics. Just a black and white photo of the Marigold's neon sign. I called it the Wharf Ledger. My hands were shaking. This was the point of no return. I wrote out the whole story. I started with the Interstate Integrity Bureau visiting the diner. I described their cheap suits, their fake IDs, their threats to misses. I posted a scanned, redacted copy of one of the compliance fees we'd found in the storage room. I wrote about the power cut. I wrote about the blackmail video. I didn't mention Ronan. I didn't mention the Viscari family. I didn't mention the 27 suits. This wasn't his story. It was mine. It was the story of a small diner being squeezed by a corporate boa constrictor hiding behind a mask of civic duty. At the bottom, I put an email address, a secure, encrypted one that Russo, Ronan's lawyer, had set up. I wrote, "This happened to us. Has it happened to you? Send us your story. Send us your receipts. They are counting on us being too scared to talk. Let's show them they're wrong." I stared at the publish button for a full minute. My heart was a drum against my ribs. This wasn't like facing down a goon in the diner. This was public. This was permanent. I hit the button. For an hour, nothing happened. The post sat there with 3 views, probably all mine. I felt sick. Maybe I'd made a terrible mistake. Then my phone buzzed, and again, and again. It wasn't just a ripple. It was a tidal wave. The post was shared 10 times, then 100, then 1,000. People I'd served coffee to for years. Longshoremen, other diner owners, florists, mechanics. This happened to us. They called themselves the Civic Shield. They fined my dad's bait shop $2,000. They threatened to report my kitchen to the health department. The encrypted inbox started to fill up, one by one. The other small businesses of Port Harridan began sending us their proof. Scans of fake invoices from the IB, angry. Terrified stories of their encounters with the Civic Shield Task Force. Russo's legal team was ecstatic. We weren't just building a case, we were building an army of our own. The Auric Circle didn't wait long to punch back. 2 days later, a man in a crisp suit served me at the diner. He didn't order pie. He handed me a thick envelope. It was a lawsuit, a 20-page cease and desist and a suit for defamation, filed by the Civic Shield Task Force, claiming I was a disgruntled business owner and a known associate of criminal elements that was me waging a smear campaign. They were suing me, personally, and the diner for $5 million. My hands went numb. I dropped the papers on the counter. $5 million. I called Russo, my voice a squeak. He laughed. He actually laughed. It's a slap suit. Miss Hart, strategic lawsuit against public participation. It's designed to do one thing, shut you up. It's desperate. It's clumsy. And it's the best thing that could have happened to us. How is a $5 million lawsuit the best thing, I demanded? Because they just confirmed in a public legal filing that they are the entity behind the Civic Shield Task Force. They've given us a target. Now, it's my turn. The next day, Russo filed our counterclaim. It wasn't for defamation. It was for fraud, extortion, wire fraud, and a pattern of racketeering. We weren't just defending, we were attacking. The lawsuit named the Civic Shield Task Force and, thanks to the corporate records Russo's team had dug up, its parent entity, the Oryx Circle. The Wharf Ledger posted both lawsuits, side by side. The public narrative was clear: the local diner versus the faceless, multi-million-dollar corporation. Port Harridan loves an underdog. The diner was packed. Ever since the story broke, people had been flooding in, not just to support us, but because it was the safest place in town. Everyone knew the Marigold was protected. They just didn't talk about it. That Tuesday, at 9 p.m., the place was humming. I was running 3 plates of meatloaf. June was pouring coffee, and Mrs. May was at the register. That's when they came back. The door slammed open. It was the IB leader, the one I'd faced down weeks ago. He had his 2 goons, plus 4 more. They were here in force. The diner went silent. "Lila Hart," the leader shouted, trying to sound official. "You are in violation of a legal proceeding. We have an order for you to cease and desist all operations." "That's a civil matter," I called back from the service window. "You're not a process server. You're a fake. Get out." His face turned a deep, blotchy red. He'd been humiliated, and now he was here to settle the score. "We are detaining you," he snarled, "pending investigation for criminal conspiracy." He pulled a pair of zip ties from his belt. "You're coming with us, now." He took a step. The front door opened, silently. One of Ronan's men stepped inside. He stood by the door, his hands clasped in front of him. The door opened again. Another suit? He stood next to the first. One by one, they filed in, but this time, they didn't take seats. They lined up. They formed a perfect silent corridor, 2 deep, from the front door right to the counter where the IIB men were standing. 27 men, a human wall. The IB men were trapped between the end of the line and the counter. They looked around, their bravado evaporating. In the booths, the customers didn't run. They pulled out their phones. A dozen tiny red record lights blinked on in the dim light. They were filming. This was the light, and this was my proof. The leader of the IB team looked at the wall of suits, then at the cameras. He was trapped. The front door opened one last time. Ronan Vascari walked in. He was 3 minutes late. He must have been waiting. He didn't look at his men, didn't look at me. He walked calmly into the middle of the diner, directly into the view of every single phone camera. He stopped right behind the IUB leader, who hadn't seen him. Ronan looked at his men. He spoke. His voice not loud, but it filled the entire silent diner. "Gentlemen," he said, smoothing the cuff of his shirt, "the order is clear. Do not touch anyone first." The IUB leader spun around, his face pale as dough. He was staring up at Ronan Vascari. Then, I felt all the fear drain out of me. It was my turn. I walked out from behind the counter, my hands in my apron. I stood in front of the IIB leader, right next to Ronan, my own phone in my hand, recording his face. "What is your name?" I asked, my voice ringing with a clarity I didn't know I possessed. "And what is your badge number?" "I am," he stammered. Under Section 1983 of the U.S. Code, I said. The words Rousseau had made me memorize coming out clear and strong. You are acting under color of law. If you attempt to detain me without a warrant, you are committing a felony. If you are not a sworn officer, you are committing a felony. So I demand to see a warrant, signed by a judge, for my arrest. The man stared at me. He had nothing. Where? I pressed. Is your warrant? From the back booth, one of the old longshoremen started to clap, slowly, then another customer, and another. Within seconds, the entire diner was filled with applause. The IAB leader's face crumpled. He was beaten. He looked at his men. He looked at the silent wall of suits. He looked at the dozen cameras capturing his humiliation. This isn't over, he whispered, a pathetic, empty threat. He and his men pushed their way back through the corridor of suits. They weren't touched. Not a single hand was laid on them. They were just permitted to leave. The door slammed shut. The diner exploded in cheers. Ronan looked at me. His harbor gray eyes were proud. He nodded once, a quick, sharp gesture of approval. Then, as quietly as he'd arrived, he and his 27 men filed out. Late that night, after the diner was closed and the adrenaline had faded, Ronan was waiting for me. He was parked at the end of the pier in his dark, quiet car. I got in. We didn't talk about the diner. We didn't have to. He drove us to the end of the port, to the old, disused ferry terminal. We got out and stood by the railing, the wind cold and sharp, smelling of salt and rust. Across the black water, a massive, three-tiered riverboat was lit up like a Christmas tree. It was anchored out in the bay, just beyond the city limit. The Nightingale Royale, I said. The Nightingale Royale, he confirmed. Auric's floating bank. They run their high-stakes games out there. It's where they launder the cash they squeeze from the wharf. It's where their leader, Silas Dorn, holds court. We've hit their wallets, I said, and we've hit their reputation, but they won't stop until we hit him. Dorn is insulated, Ronan said. He's smart. He doesn't leave a paper trail. The only way to get him is to get him to confess. A sting, I said. He nodded. They're hosting a private investors game in 3 days. They'll be looking for new clients to bring into their circle. You've made a lot of noise. Lila, you're exactly the kind of person Dorn would want to meet. He'd want to buy your silence, or bring you in. I've never played a hand of poker in my life. You won't have to, Ronan said. He leaned against the railing, the lights of the casino boat glittering in his eyes. You just have to watch. You can learn more about a man by how he holds his cards than by what he plays. He held up his hand. Watch. A nervous man shuffles his chips. A bluffing man stares. A man with a winning hand, his breathing changes. His fingers. Watch their fingers. I looked at his hands. They were strong, steady, the hands that had made me coffee. It's like baking, I said, almost to myself. He turned, intrigued. How? You're watching for tells, I said. I'm watching for temperature. You can't just follow a recipe. You have to feel the dough. If it's too warm, the butter melts and the crust is tough. If it's too cold, it won't flake. You have to listen to what the dough is telling you. He was quiet for a long time, just watching me. The wind was picking up, whipping my hair across my face. I shivered. Without a word, he took off his heavy wool coat, the same one he'd worn the night he'd filled the diner, and draped it over my shoulders. It was heavy, and it smelled of him a faint, clean scent of cedar and wool and something metallic, like the sea air. The warmth of it sank into my skin. It was overwhelming. I looked up at him. The lights of the Nightingale Royale were casting strange, colorful shadows on his face. He was standing close, closer than he'd ever been. He wasn't the Mafia boss. I wasn't the waitress. We were just two people, on a dark pier, planning a war. He lifted his hand, his fingers tracing the line of my jaw, his touch so light it was barely there. My breath caught in my throat. This was dangerous. More dangerous than the IUB. More dangerous than the lawsuit. He leaned in, slowly, his eyes holding mine. A fire started low in my stomach. a slow burning heat that had nothing to do with his coat. But I turned my head, just an inch. His fingers brushed my cheek. "This isn't the timing," I whispered, my voice thick. He didn't look angry. He didn't look rejected. He just waited. His hand dropped, but his thumb brushed across mine. He took my hand, lacing his fingers through mine, a simple, warm, anchoring grasp. "I can wait," he said, his voice a low rumble. We stood there for a long time, holding hands, staring at the enemy's fortress. Above us, the bright, sweeping beam of the channel beacon cut through the darkness, once, twice. It wasn't a warning anymore. It was a countdown. The storm was here. The last 2 days were a blur. The training wasn't about cards. It was about people. Ronan and his lawyer, Russo, drilled me. I memorized the faces of every major player in the Auric Circle. I learned the layout of the Nightingale Royale from blueprints that were probably stolen. I learned the subtle hand signals Ronan's men would use if they were in the room. It was exhausting. It was like cramming for an exam where failing meant well. I tried not to think about what failing meant. I was running on fumes, my brain packed with faces, names, and escape routes. When our last session ended, it was well past midnight. I was rubbing my temples, my eyes burning. "I think I'm ready," I'd whispered. Ronan just watched me, his expression unreadable. "You're prepared," he said, "but you're not ready. You're exhausted." I thought he was driving me home. I must have dozed off in the warm, quiet car, because when I woke, we weren't at my shabby apartment. We were pulling up to a building I'd never seen before. A tall, narrow spire of dark glass and old brick downtown, overlooking the bay. "Where are we?" "The Beacon," he said, shutting off the engine. "It's one of mine." Of course it was. A boutique hotel. The lobby was all dark wood, soft lighting, and silence. No one was at the desk. He led me straight to a private elevator, which opened with a heavy brass key. We rode up in silence. I was too tired to argue, too tired to be scared. I was just done. The elevator opened directly into a room, a suite. He punched in a code, and the lights came up, but only to a low, warm glow. 1507, he said, as if that meant something. The first thing I noticed was the window. It was a wall of glass, looking straight out over the dark, restless water of Port Harridan. I could see the Nightingale Royale anchored in the distance, a gaudy, glittering insect on the black water. The second thing I noticed was the smell. My heart stopped. It smelled like cinnamon, like baked butter and apples. I turned. On a small table by the window, there was a plate, and on it, a single, perfect slice of apple pie. "How?" I whispered. "The chef at the Marigold gave me the recipe," Ronan said, his voice quiet. He was hanging his coat in a closet. "I had the kitchen here practice, until they got it right." He'd recreated the smell of the diner, the smell of my home. He'd brought my territory into his. It was the most calculated, overwhelming gesture of kindness I'd ever experienced. He went to the window, his back to me, and he was checking the locks, a professional, methodical check. He ran his hand along the frame. He was giving me space. After our moment on the pier, the one I'd cut short, he was letting me set the terms. He was being a gentleman. But I wasn't the girl on the pier anymore. I was tired of being scared. I was tired of fighting. Just for one night. I walked up behind him. He was so still. He was wearing a simple, dark cashmere sweater, and I could feel the heat coming off him. I did what I'd been wanting to do for days. I reached out and placed my hand flat on his back. He froze. I slid my hand up to his shoulder, then around to his chest. I felt his heart. It was beating. Fast. Faster than I expected. Not the steady, slow engine of a machine. It was human. He turned slowly to face me. He didn't cover my hand with his. He didn't move. He just let me... "You're afraid," I whispered. His gray eyes searched mine. "What?" "You. Under all of it. You're afraid. I can feel it." He was quiet for a long moment. "I'm not afraid for myself. Lila." I know, I said, my hand still pressed against his heart. That's what makes it so complicated. I'm afraid of this boat. I'm afraid of Silas Dorn. But most of all, I'm afraid of this. Of you. Of me. I'm afraid of becoming a puppet, I said, the word tasting bitter. I'm afraid of being the girl who was saved and who owes everything to the man in the castle. I'm afraid of losing the one thing I have, which is me. He finally moved. He covered my hand with his. His skin was warm. He didn't pull it away. He just held it there, against his chest. You could never be a puppet, Lila, he said, his voice a low rumble. You're the least controllable person I've ever met. That's why Dorn is so focused on you, and it's why He stopped. My fear, he said, his voice dropping, is simple. I'm afraid of losing someone I've promised to protect. It's happened before. I won't let it happen again. There it was, the truth, stripped bare. We weren't a boss and a waitress. We were just two people, on the edge of a fight, both terrified of losing something. His other hand came up, his fingers tracing the collar of my shirt. He didn't grab, he didn't pull, he just touched. A question. This time I didn't turn away. I nodded, just once. He leaned in. The kiss was nothing like I'd imagined. There was no invasion, no force. It wasn't the kiss of a conqueror or a boss or a criminal. It was slow, it was warm, it was impossibly gentle. It was a request, and a thank you, and a promise, all in one. It tasted of the cold night air and the warmth of the room. I felt his lips, soft and hesitant, and then, as I leaned into it, he deepened it. Just a fraction. My hands, of their own accord, moved from his chest to his shoulders. The heavy wool coat he'd put on me at the pier was still draped over me. As I reached up, it slipped off my shoulders and pooled on the floor at my feet, a dark cloud of wool. I shivered, and he pulled back instantly. "You're cold," he whispered. "No, I'm not." "You're still in your sweater," he said, his thumb brushing my cheekbone. "If you're cold, tell me." He was giving me every out, every chance to stop. "I'm not cold, Ronan." He kissed me again. This time, it was different. It was still gentle. But there was a current underneath it, the power I knew he had. Not power over me, but just power. His hand slid from my cheek to the back of my neck, his fingers tangling in my hair. He wasn't pulling. He was just holding, treasuring. His other hand moved to my back, pressing me closer. It was a gesture of reassurance, of anchoring. "I'm here. You're safe." I felt my body relax against his. All the tension, all the fear from the last 2 days just melted away. I was so tired, and he was so strong. He was the first thing in my life that felt solid. He broke the kiss, resting his forehead against mine. We were both breathing fast. "This is a lot," I whispered. "I know." He led me away from the window, away from the glittering, dangerous boat. There was a large, plush divan in the center of the room. Not the bedroom, the divan. He sat and pulled me down next to him. He didn't try to kiss me again. He just held me. I leaned my head against his shoulder, and his arms came around me, pulling me against his side. He was so warm. We sat there, in the quiet, watching the lights of the harbor. "The recipe," I said, my voice muffled by his sweater. My recipe for life? I think I just figured it out." I felt him smile. "Oh yeah, what is it?" "1 part courage. You have to have that, just to get out of bed." "Agreed," he rumbled. 2 parts kindness," I went on, "because it's the only thing that matters. It's the only thing that ever saved me. A free piece of pie, a cup of coffee." "Go on." "And you have to bake it at the right temperature. You have to have patience." He was quiet. "Patience," he repeated. "Like waiting." "Like waiting," I agreed. He tilted my chin up. His eyes were soft in the dim light. "I can be patient." He kissed me, just once, soft and deep. Then he adjusted his hold, letting me get comfortable. I curled up against him, my hand on his chest, feeling his heart finally slow down, matching mine. The room was quiet. I could hear his breathing. Steady and even, I could hear mine, falling into the same rhythm. A soft blanket was draped over the back of the divan. He pulled it down, tucking it around my shoulders. Over both of us. The light from the window was soft, tracing the line of his shoulder, glinting off the dark water outside. I was safe. I was warm. And just for tonight, I let myself be. I must have drifted off. I woke up, hours later, to the low, mournful sound of a foghorn. I was still on the divan. Ronan was still next to me, his arms still around me. He was awake. He was just watching me. He saw my eyes open. He didn't look flustered or guilty. He just looked content. He lifted my hand, the one that was resting on his chest, and brought it to his lips. He pressed a soft, warm kiss to my knuckles. "Tonight," he whispered, his voice rough with sleep, "is just us." He looked past me, toward the dark window. No harbor, no enemies, just us. I turned my head. Outside, the fog was rolling in, thick and heavy, obscuring the lights of the Nightingale Royale. The foghorn sounded again, closer this time, a deep, long call. The truce was over. The finale was about to begin. I woke up alone. The scent of cedarwood and apple pie was still on the air, a ghost of the night before. But the warmth of Ronan's arms was gone, and the room, sweet 1507, felt cold in the harsh, gray light of dawn. He had left before I woke. It was a tactical retreat. Last night had been a truce, a pause. Today was the war. My cheap phone was on the bedside table, right next to the slice of pie I'd never eaten. It buzzed, rattling on the polished wood. I flinched, expecting it to be Ronan with instructions. It was June. My stomach twisted. I hadn't told her about the sting. I'd told her to stay home, to lay low, to be safe. Her text message was frantic. "Lila, I'm so sorry. I was so scared. I did something. Please don't be mad." My fingers were clumsy. "Did what, June? Are you okay?" A second later, an audio file appeared. I couldn't just sit there. I took an extra shift at the Wharfside Grill last night. They have a catering contract with the Nightingale. I recognized him. Lila, the leader of those IUB guys. He was in the back kitchen, meeting someone. I put my phone in my apron and hit record. My heart stopped. I pressed play. The audio was terrible. The clang of steel pans, a chef yelling for an order, the sizzle of a grill, but underneath it, I could hear his voice, the IUB leader, snarling. "The percentage is too low for the risk. We're the ones taking all the heat on the street." And then another voice. It was smooth, educated, cold. It wasn't Ronan. "You get 10% mine," the cold voice said. "As agreed, the Auric Circle provides the legal and financial cover. The Civic Shield Task Force provides the public one. You're just the hired muscle. You're paid to follow orders, not to negotiate." "Yeah, well, the orders are getting loud," the goon grumbled. "This waitress—" "The waitress," the cold voice interrupted, "is being handled. Your only concern is the marigold. Dorn wants it. He wants the land, clear and legal. Shut the waitress up or shut the diner down. I don't care how. Just get it done." My blood turned to ice. It was the smoking gun, the direct, undeniable link between the IUB, the Civic Shield, and this Auric Circle. And they had named the boss, Dorn. I threw on my clothes and ran out of the hotel. I found Mrs. May in the back office of the diner, staring at the wall, a full cup of coffee cold in her hands. I played the audio for her. I expected her to be shocked or vindicated. She just looked broken. "He's right," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. "They're going to take the diner." "No," I said, my voice too loud in the small room. "This is the proof. We can use this. We can give this to Russo." "It doesn't matter," she said. She reached into the locked bottom drawer of her desk and pulled out a thick, yellowed, folded document. "It's too late. They already won." She slid the papers across the desk. "I lied to you. Child, not a real lie. I was too ashamed to tell you. I unfolded the document. It was a business protection contract, dated 5 years ago. When my Arthur got sick, she whispered, her eyes fixed on the past. The medical bills it was too much. I was going to lose everything. And these men, they came to me. Not the IOB. They were polite. They were from a group called Aurelius Holdings. They offered me a loan, a private loan, to save the diner. They called it regulatory insurance. I scanned the pages, my stomach sinking. The interest rate was predatory, just shy of illegal. And then I saw it. The default clause. In the event of non-payment, regulatory non-compliance, or a disruption of business for more than 72 hours, the full amount is due. If payment cannot be made, the property and all assets therein revert to the lender. Mrs. May, I said, my voice flat, the power cut. They cut the power for more than 3 days until Ronan's men fixed it. They created the default. They came by yesterday, she cried, her composure finally breaking. They said I was in breach. They gave me 24 hours to pay $200,000, or they take the marigold. It all clicked into place. The IUB, the harassment, the power cut. It wasn't just random thuggery. It was a calculated, legal, corporate foreclosure, executed with street muscle. They don't just want to shake us down, I whispered. Looking out the window, the new pier for the Nightingale Royale was almost finished. They want the land. We're the parking lot. The diner, our home, was just a small square of dirt they needed to build a parking garage for their casino. I pulled out my phone. I was shaking with a cold, pure rage. I called Ronan. Aurelius Holdings, I snapped. The second he answered, Is that you? Is your Aurelius Mercy Fund just some sick joke? Are you playing both sides of this? There was a heavy silence. When he spoke, his voice was like gravel. Where are you? At the diner. Where else? Stay there. He was there in 10 minutes. He didn't come in. His black car just idled at the curb. I went out. The wind was cold, carrying the smell of low tide. I got in the passenger seat. He was staring at the diner. Silas Dorn, he said, not looking at me. The man who runs the Auric Circle here. He steals names. He co-ops them. My family's Aurelius Fund is real. It's a charitable trust my grandfather started 50 years ago. Dorn created Aurelius Holdings to muddy the waters, to confuse the issue. He hides his crimes in plain sight, using names that sound legitimate. Civic Shield. Aurelius. This Dorn, I said, my voice tight. He's the one June recorded. He's the one trying to steal the diner. Ronan finally turned to look at me. His eyes were heavy. Silas Dorn is the most powerful, legitimate businessman on this wharf. He sits on the casino board and, yes, he's the one. We grew up together on these docks. He was my best friend. The confession hung in the air, thick and poisoned. I can't go onto that boat, Ronan said, his voice flat. The second I do, it's a war. Silas knows my face. He knows my tells. He knows how my men move. He'd anticipate every play I make before I even make it. He's been waiting for me to show my hand. So what, I said, defeated. He just wins. He takes the diner. It's all over. No, Ronan said, his gaze fixed on me. He's been waiting for me. He knows how I think. He doesn't know how you think. He's heard about you. The waitress who started a war. He's arrogant. He's curious. He thinks you're a bug he can either squash or put in a jar. What are you saying? He doesn't know your tells. Lila, you're the one person who can get in that room. You're the wild card he can't predict. He was asking me to go. After last night, he was asking me to walk into the lion's den. Because he couldn't. I looked at the marigold, at the A rating in the window. I thought of Mrs. May, broken in the office. I thought of my dad. Seeing clearly for the first time in years, I thought of the tin box. All right, I said, I'll go. Lila? I'll go, I said, turning to him. But I have one condition, not a request, a condition. Name it. The diner misses. May has already lost it. When this is over, if we win, I'm not trading her old boss for a new one. Not even you. I want that fake contract bought out. I want the deed. And I want the ownership of the Marigold Pie Diner transferred. Not to me, to a community fund, the Wharf Ledger Trust. I'll manage it. The diner will be owned by this neighborhood. Forever. No one ever gets to use it as a pawn again. I expected him to argue, to tell me it was too much. He just stared at me for a long, heavy moment. Then a slow, tired smile touched his lips. You really are something else. Lila Hart. He pulled out his phone. He didn't call. He just texted. It's done, he said, putting the phone away. Russo will file the harbor deed. The Vescari Trust will acquire the debt from Aurelius Holdings at a significant, non-negotiable discount, and the property will be transferred to your trust by 5 p.m. The Marigold is yours and everyone's. He looked at me. Now, will you go? I'm already gone, I said. 3 hours later, I was standing in front of a mirror in a different room at the Beacon. I was wearing a simple sea blue dress. Elegant, understated. I looked not like a waitress. Russo was clipping a small silver pen into the neckline of the dress. The camera is here, he said, tapping it. The audio is live. It's streaming directly to us. We will have a technical team on a boat nearby, boosting the signal. Ronan's men will be present, but they will be invisible. You are the only one in that room. What am I selling? I asked, my voice sounding distant. Your silence, Russo said. Dorn thinks this is a negotiation. You have June's audio. You have the lawsuit. You have the Wharf Ledger. You have leverage. You're going there to make a deal. Get him to admit, on camera, that he is the one behind the IIB and the Civic Shield. That's all we need. Get him to say his own name in connection with the crimes. The launch boat to the Nightingale Royale was small and fast. I was the only passenger. My heart was a cold stone in my chest. The VIP room was at the top of the boat. It was silent. All thick carpets and dark wood, a stark contrast to the loud, gaudy casino floor below. Silas Dorn was standing by a massive window overlooking the dark water. It was disappointingly normal. He wore a perfectly tailored suit, his hair was graying at the temples, and he had a warm, reassuring smile. He looked like a banker. Miss Hart, he said, spreading his hands, his voice the same smooth, cold one from June's recording. The giant killer, the waitress who's teaching the whole wharf how to bark. I have to say I'm impressed. I'm not here for compliments. Mr. Dorn, I said, surprised at how steady my voice was. I'm here to make a deal. Are you, he chuckled, pouring himself a scotch. You're here for an interview. A what? I want to hire you, he said, gesturing to the chair opposite his. This whole Wharf Ledger thing, brilliant. You've got the whole port eating out of your hand. You've caused me a considerable headache. I admire that. I sat. I didn't touch the water glass he'd offered. You want to hire me after you tried to destroy my diner? He laughed, a loud barking sound. Oh, that business? You think I care about that rinky-dink pie shop I'm building a 1,000-car garage for this casino? That diner is just dust. Those fake inspectors, morons. But they serve their purpose. They soften the ground. My hand twitched toward the pen. I kept it still. So you admit it, I said, my voice just a whisper. The IEB, the Civic Shield Task Force. It's all you, just to build a parking lot. It's not just a parking lot, sweetheart, he sneered, his mask of charm dropping. He leaned forward. It's the future of Port Harridan. And you're a talent. You're wasting it fighting for scraps. Stop fighting. Come work for the winner. Got him. I smiled. I think I'll pass. Just as I said it, the lights in the room flickered. Once, twice. The large flat screen on his wall went from a news feed to static. My heart hammered. The signal. Dorn's smile vanished. He tapped an earpiece I hadn't even seen. What? What's going on with the feed? He listened. What on the service deck? Who? The door to the room burst open. It wasn't one of Ronan's men. It was one of Dorn's private security. a mountain of a man in a black suit, and he was dragging someone by the arm. We found her on the lower deck. Boss, the guard growled. She had this, trying to get past the jammers. He threw a small and black device onto the table, a signal booster. Then he shoved the person he was holding into the light. My blood ran cold. "June!" I screamed. June was terrified, tears streaming down her face. She had tried to help. She had tried to make sure the signal got out. Dorn looked at June. He looked at the booster on the table, and then his eyes snapped to the silver pen clipped to the neckline of my dress. He knew. His face went from arrogance to a pure, white-hot fury. He didn't lunge for me. He grabbed June. He yanked her back, pulling her hard against his chest, one thick arm locking around her throat, cutting off her air. "You stupid mutt," he hissed, his voice a lethal whisper in my ear. "You stupid little waitress." He backed toward a private elevator, using June as a human shield, his arm tight across her neck. "Ronan!" I screamed, knowing he couldn't hear me. "Ronan, no!" The plan was gone. The script was torn up. This wasn't a sting, it was a hostage crisis, and I had just led June right into the trap. The heavy elevator doors slid shut, sealing me in silence. The image of June's terrified face, her neck trapped in Dorn's arm, burned into my retinas. I was screaming, pounding on the metal. "June, no." The doors opened, not to a service bay, but to the main casino floor. It was normal. The same slot machine sounds, the same low murmur of conversation, the same clinking glasses. Dorn was too smart for a scene. He was using the rat lines, the staff corridors, to get away. I was paralyzed. I had no idea where to go. Then, a hand on my arm, hard. "This way, Miss Hart." It was one of the suits, one of the Harbor Oath. I didn't recognize him, but I'd recognize that air of disciplined calm anywhere. He wasn't running. He was moving, pulling me through the crowd, past a velvet rope, and into a high-limit baccarat lounge that had been completely cleared out. It was a command center. Russo, the lawyer, was at a table, laptops open, his face pale, and Ronan was there. He wasn't in his coat. He was in his shirt sleeves, an earpiece in his face carved from ice. He saw me, and his eyes, it wasn't anger. It was a cold, pure focus. "He's in service elevator B," Ronan said, his voice a low, lethal blade. He wasn't talking to me. He was talking to his team. "Alpha, you take the main stairs. Block the casino launch bay. He cannot get on the water." His head snapped to Russo. "Get that live stream back. The pen is dead, but the bugs in the room aren't. I want every word Dorn said. I want June's audio. Get it, now." He finally looked at me. The ice in his eyes wavered. Just for a second, he saw my terror. "You're with me." He didn't wait for an answer. He grabbed my hand. We didn't take the elevator. He kicked open a fire door, and we were plunging down a narrow, steep, metal stairwell. My stupid, beautiful blue dress, my armor for the sting, was a liability. The skirt catching on the railing, I hiked it up to my thighs and ran. We burst out onto the launch deck. The cold, wet air hit me like a slap. We were too late. A black, needle-nosed speedboat was peeling away from the dock, its engine a deep-throated roar. I could see them. Two figures in the back, Dorn and June, a pale splash of white, his arm still locked around her. "No!" I screamed, running to the edge. Ronan pulled me back, his hand on my arm. He was already on his comms, not a trace of panic in his voice. "He's on the water. Northbound. He's running to the Greyfin. All teams. Converge on Greyfin Bridge. Red Hook Yard." He looked at me, his hand still on my arm, his grip grounding me. "The Greyfin Bridge. It's under construction. Deserted at night. Mostly." "Mostly?" "Below it," he said, pulling me toward his own waiting boat, "is the old Red Hook shipyard. It's his real office. The Oryx Circle's main warehouse." 10 minutes later, we were at the docks. The city lights blurred around us. Ronan's men were already there, converging in dark, unmarked vans. They weren't in suits anymore. They were in dark, functional gear. They were grabbing heavy bags from the trunks of their sedans. It was tactical. It was fast. I felt utterly, completely useless. I was a waitress. I was the one who had brought a pie knife to a gunfight. June was in that warehouse because of me. "Wait," I said, my voice hoarse. Ronan turned, halfway into pulling on a dark jacket. "Lila, not now. You need to stay here. You're out." "No," I said, grabbing his arm. "The Grayfin. They're working on the supports. It's a 24/7 job. The night crew. There must be 50, maybe 100 guys up there right now." He nodded, impatient. "It's a civilian site, but we know. We're going in quiet. From the water." "He'll be expecting that," I said, the idea hitting me, hot and fast. "He's expecting you. He's expecting the harbor oath. He's not expecting me, not the way he knows me." I pointed across the street, where the neon sign of the Marigold cut through the fog. "Get me the pie van." He stared at me as if I'd lost my mind. "Get me the van," I pressed, my voice gaining strength. "Get Mrs. Made to load it. 30 pies, hot, and as much coffee as it'll hold. The construction crew, they're my people. They're the midnight shift. They've been coming into the diner for years. They're hungry. And they will swarm free pie." I saw the calculation in his eyes, the doubt. "It's a diversion," I said, desperate. "It's a crowd. It's a wall of innocent people, of hard hats and reflective vests. His gunmen won't be able to see past them. They won't know who's who. It's my cover. He's expecting a soldier. He's not expecting a waitress. Let me be what I am." He stared at me for one long, unblinking second, then he nodded. "Do it." 20 minutes later, I was driving the clunky, familiar Marigold van. I'd thrown my old apron on over the blue dress. I was shaking, but my hands were steady on the wheel. Ronan was in the passenger seat. He'd lost the jacket. He was just in a dark shirt. His sleeves rolled up. He looked out of place, tense. His men were in 2 dark work vans, trailing 2 blocks behind us. The Grayfin Bridge site was a hive of light and noise. Arc welders sparked. Generators hummed. I pulled the van right up to the security checkpoint. A big man in a hard hat walked up. I recognized him. Frank. He was a regular meatloaf, extra gravy. "Lila," he said, squinting, "what the hell are you doing here at 2 a.m? I forced a smile, my heart pounding. Midnight pie run, Frank, Mrs., May baked extra. We figured you guys might be hungry. It's all on the house." His face lit up. "On the Lila, you're an angel." He grabbed his radio. "Hey, fellas, you are not going to believe this. The Marigold is here, and it's free." It was a flood. A sea of yellow and orange reflective vests poured out of the site, shouting, laughing. "Is there apple? God bless you. Lila." It was chaos, a beautiful, perfect, normal chaos. And into that sea of yellow vests, Ronan and his men, dressed in dark work clothes, just melted. They were shadows in the crowd. The Auric warehouse was just below the bridge supports, a massive, rusted steel box. Dorn's speedboat was tied at the dark pier. His men were at the entrance, 4 of them. They looked nervous, confused by the sudden party of 50 construction workers just above them. I grabbed a box of pies. "I'm just going to take some down to those guys," I said to Frank, pointing toward the warehouse. "They look like they're working, too." "Yeah, whatever," he said, his mouth full of pie. "Go ahead." I started walking down the gravel ramp. Ronan was right behind me, carrying the heavy box of coffee. We looked, for all the world, like catering. We walked right toward the entrance. 2 of Dorn's men stepped up, their hands inside their jackets. "Hey, this is private property. You can't—" "Oh, goodness," I shouted, tripping over a loose piece of rebar, my ankles wobbling. The box of pies went flying, hot apple crumble and tinfoil pans scattered across the concrete. "Oh, no, my pies, they're ruined." It was a stupid, clumsy, ridiculous move. But from inside the massive, dark warehouse bay, I saw her, June. She was tied to a steel chair near a stack of I-beams. She saw me. She saw the pies. Her terrified eyes widened. It was my signal. "I'm here." The guard who had spoken lunged for me. "You clumsy!" Ronan moved. He didn't punch. He wasn't a brawler. He was a blur. His hand moved, and the guard just crumpled. Now, Dorn's voice roared from inside. His other men, 5, maybe 6 of them, raised their weapons. Pop, 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 pop! It wasn't them. It was us. Ronan's team, the Harbor Oath, materialized from the shadows of the bridge supports. The sound of gunfire was sharp, metallic. It wasn't a wild spray. It was precise, controlled. Ronan grabbed me by the waist and threw me behind a massive steel girder. "Stay here," he yelled. He leaned out. His weapon in his hand, he fired twice. Pop, pop. The 2 main floodlights in the bay shattered, plunging the warehouse into semi-darkness. The only light came from the arc welders on the bridge above, casting long, dancing shadows. He wasn't aiming at the men. He was opening a path. He was disabling them. June was still tied to the chair. Dorn was across the bay, grabbing a briefcase, using the chaos to get to his boat. I saw it, on the wall, right next to me, a coiled yellow safety line and a construction harness. I grabbed it. I fumbled with the clips, my hands shaking. "Lila, no!" Ronan yelled, seeing what I was doing. I didn't listen. I ran up a short flight of metal stairs to a gantry, right above June. I clipped the line to the steel rail and I jumped. I swung down, crashing hard into June's chair, knocking it over. She screamed. Dorn looked up, his face a mask of stunned fury. "My apron," I yelled, fumbling with the thick zip-tie cuffs on her hands. "In the pocket." I'd forgotten it was there. My old, faithful, wooden-handled apple paring knife, the one I used to core apples. Her hands, still bound, fumbled in my apron pocket. She got it. I grabbed it. I sawed at the thick plastic, the blade slipping. Ronan, Dorn's voice bellowed, "You want her catch!" He threw something, a small black block. It arced through the air. It wasn't a grenade. It was a demolition charge, a small one, but big enough. It hit a stack of rebar between us and him, and it went off. The explosion was deafening. It wasn't a fireball. It was a concussion. A blast of sparks, noise, and hot metal fragments. I screamed, throwing my body over June. A shadow covered me. Ronan? He'd launched himself over the both of us, his back to the blast, his arms covering my head, tucking me and June into a ball. He roared, a deep, guttural sound, as hot shrapnel tore into his back. I smelled it, the scent of burning wool, his coat, the one he'd put on me at the pier, the one that had been singed at the shoulder. It was smoking. Then sirens. Dozens of them. Red and blue lights flooded the shipyard, cutting through the shadows. Cops, real cops. They flooded the yard, weapons drawn. But they stopped. They formed a perimeter. They were just standing there, watching. They weren't arresting Dorn's men. They weren't helping us. They were a wall. They weren't here to save us. They were here to contain. Auric owned them, too. Ronan was hurt. He was bleeding. He pushed himself off me, his face pale with pain. He looked at his men, who were trapped between the cops and Dorn's position. He made a hand signal, a sharp, cutting motion. "Disengage, retreat." He was choosing to save his people. He was accepting the loss. Dorn was using the confusion, the wall of useless cops, to get to his speedboat. He was running. As he jumped onto the deck, he dropped it, the briefcase he'd been reaching for. It fell to the pier, spilling open. I wasn't letting him win. I scrambled out from under Ronan. "Lila, no!" I ran, right past the line of cops. They just watched me. I snatched the briefcase, scooping up the papers that had fallen out. It wasn't cash. It was ledgers, names, dates, payments to shell corporations, payments to Civic Shield. It was his black book. "Lila," Ronan yelled, his voice strained. I ran back, clutching the briefcase to my chest. His men were covering us, pulling back into the shadows of the bridge, blending with the construction workers who were all being held back by the useless cops. We were just gone. Ronan was leaning on me, his arm draped over my shoulder, his coat singed and bloody. We were hurt. We'd lost the battle. As Dorn's boat disappeared into the dark harbor, his voice, amplified, crackled over a loudspeaker, echoing across the shipyard. This isn't over. Ronan, you took my prize. You want the girl. You want to end this. Meet me where it all began. The Clamshell Pier midnight. Just you. We didn't go back to the Beacon. We went to the Marigold. It was the only place that felt safe. It was our fortress. Ronan's men. The harbor oath, materialized from the shadows, forming a silent, invisible perimeter a block in every direction. The cops who had stood by and watched at the shipyard, they were gone. They had melted back into the gray, leaving the wharf to its true masters. We were in the back office. I was kneeling on the floor, my blue dress stained with mud and rust, my hands shaking as I tried to clean the shrapnel wounds on Ronan's back. The explosion had been too close. His coat was ruined, a scorched, bloody mess on the floor. His dark shirt was stuck to his skin. "It's not that deep," I lied, my voice trembling. I was using bar towels soaked in cheap whiskey from Mrs. May's private stash. He didn't even flinch, though I could feel the muscles in his back coiled as tight as steel cables. "Dorn always liked fire," Ronan said, his voice quiet, rough with pain. He was staring at the wall, but he wasn't seeing it, even as a kid. "The Clamshell Pier," I said, my voice flat. He said, "Where it all began. For you, right." Ronan was silent. He didn't have to answer. I knew the place. My breath hitched. He knows about me." Ronan turned his head, his gray eyes searching mine. "What do you mean?" "The Clamshell Pier," I whispered, my hands freezing on his back. "It's not just a pier. It's where I had my first food cart when I was 17. Just me and a propane stove, selling apple hand pies to the fishermen. It's where my mother taught me to work the wharf." Dorn's challenge hadn't just been for Ronan. The place was for me. It was a psychological blow. He was telling me he knew everything. He was telling me he could take that memory, that beginning, and he could burn it too. The wind howled outside, rattling the small office window. A full-blown Port Harridan nor'easter was tearing in from the sea. The rain was coming down in sheets, a sound like gravel being thrown against the roof. The flags on the port cranes would be screaming. "Midnight," Ronan said. He stood up, shrugging off my hands. He was in pain, but he hid it, pulling his shirt back down. He said, "Just you. He wants me. Alone. This is between me and him." "No," I said, standing up. "Lila, this is not a discussion. You got the ledger." He pointed to the briefcase I'd dropped by the door, the black book that could end all of this. "You won. Now you stay here, where it's safe. You stay with Mrs. May. I go and I finish this." "You're hurt," I argued. "I've been hurt worse." "That's not the point," I shouted, the storm in the room suddenly as loud as the one outside. "You can't just go. He wants to end you, Ronan, and you think I'm just going to hide and wait." "Yes," he roared back, his control finally breaking. "That is exactly what I think. That is the entire point I am supposed to protect." "I don't need to be protected." I stepped right up to him, my finger jabbing his chest, right where my hand had rested just last night. "I need to win. This is my life. He didn't just hurt you. He put his hands on June. He tried to take my home. He's meeting us on my pier. This isn't your past, Ronan. This is my future. And I am going to be there to end it." His gaze was furious, but the anger faded, replaced by that same tired, calculating look. "You're right," he said, his voice dropping. "He's not expecting us both. He's expecting me. Or he's expecting an army. He's not expecting a debate." "A debate?" "The ledger," he said, nodding toward the briefcase. "It's our weapon, but we can't just hand it to the cops. They're owned. We can't just give it to the press. They'll bury it. We have to give it to everyone." The plan formed, sharp and clear, in the space between us. June, who had been sitting in the diner, wrapped in a shock blanket, came into the office. Her face was pale, her eyes red, but the fear was gone. It had been replaced by a cold, hard anger that looked just like mine. "I can do it," she said, her voice steady. "The Wharf Ledger, it has 40,000 followers. Since tonight, the whole city is watching it." She picked up the ledger from the briefcase. "These are spreadsheets, Payments, bank transfers to shell companies, to the Civic Shield, to police captains, to 2 city council members. Ronan looked at Russo, who had been silent in the corner. How long to scan, verify, and package this for a public data dump? With a secure server and my team an hour, Russo said. But the upload to get it to 40,000 people at once. Without it being shut down, we'll need to route it through multiple servers. We'll need time. We'll need a distraction at the pier, a long one. A dialogue, I said, looking at Ronan. We're not going there to fight him. We're going there to talk to him. To stall. To monologue, Ronan corrected, a grim smile touching his lips. Dorn loves to hear himself talk. He'll want to gloat. We'll let him. June's fingers were already flying across her laptop, setting up a new, encrypted server. I'll go to the tech van. I'll get the feed ready. I can be your eyes. Lila, I can be on comms. I owe you that. I won't let you down again. You didn't let me down, June, I said, squeezing her shoulder. You were brave. Now, go be brilliant. She nodded and was gone. It was almost 11. We had less than an hour. Mrs. May came into the office. She was holding something behind her back. I was saving this, she said, her voice thick. She brought her hand around. It was a rolling pin, but it wasn't one of the cheap ones from the diner. It was old, the wood worn smooth, the handles a dark, rich walnut. It was heavy. This was your mother's, she said, pressing it into my hands. She brought it with her from the old country. She said it was the only thing she had that was perfectly balanced. She gave it to me for the diner when you were born. I clutched it. It felt like an anchor. It felt like a sword. She always said, Mrs., May whispered, her hand on my cheek, that you can't just be soft. You have to be strong, too. This is what keeps your back straight. Lila, this is your spine. Don't you let that man break it. I won't. I promised. She left. I was alone for a few minutes while Ronan gave his final orders to his men. They wouldn't be on the pier. They would be under it, in the water, in the shadows. This was my stage, but they were the crew. I sat at Mrs. May's desk. I took a marigold order slip, the green and white paper. I turned it over. I grabbed a pen. I just needed to remember who I was before I walked out into that storm. I wrote kindness is not a weakness. It's a choice. I paused, thinking of Ronan's arms around me, of his men, of this protection I had never asked for. I wrote being protected doesn't mean you are owned. I folded the paper and tucked it deep into my apron pocket, next to where my apple knife had been. Ronan came back in. He had a fresh, dark coat. He'd cleaned the blood from his face. He looked tired, but ready. It's time, he said. We stood in the alley by the kitchen door, under the one light the storm hadn't killed. The rain was thick, a solid, driving wall of water. Dorn, he said, his voice quiet, almost lost in the wind. The story about where it began. I waited. We were kids, maybe 12, down on that same pier. Dorn, his old man, was a mean drunk. He was hurting him. Badly. And I was just a kid. But I was Vascari. I stood between them. I took the hit. I got my own reminder. He touched a faint, silver scar on his temple I'd never noticed before. I saved him from that beating. I've been trying to save him ever since. From himself. From his greed. He looked at me, his harbor gray eyes clear. Tonight, I'm not saving him. I'm saving Port Harridan from him. There's a difference. I know, I said. He stepped closer. The wind was whipping my hair into my face. He gently brushed it back. He didn't kiss me, not on the lips. He just leaned down and pressed his forehead against mine. We stood there for a long, silent moment, the world raging around us, just breathing each other's air. Then he kissed my forehead, a simple, chaste, profound promise, a blessing before the storm. Lila, I whispered when pulling back, my hands on his coat. One more promise. Anything. The marigold. No matter what happens out there tonight, no matter what, don't let them burn it. Don't let Dorn don't let it burn. His face hardened. I will protect it, at any cost. We walked out of the alley. The city was a ghost. All the other shops on the wharf had their lights off, their metal shutters down. Closed for storm, the signs read. But I knew they were inside. They were watching. The Wharf Ledger's live stream was running. It wasn't showing us. It was a black screen with a simple white clock. A countdown. June's voice crackled in the tiny earpiece he gave me. We're live. The file is scanning. It's uploading to the cloud. You have 15 minutes of stall time. Lila, minimum. The whole city is watching this clock. We reached the street. The clock on the Port Authority tower was visible, its face a pale moon in the rain. 11:57 p. 3 minutes to midnight. As if on cue, the entire power grid of Port Harridan flickered, the streetlights died, plunging us into a deep, primal darkness. The wind howled. And then, one by one, the lights surged back on, brighter than before, humming with energy. The whole city, it was holding its breath, waiting for the show. It's time, Ronan said, taking my hand. We started walking toward the sea, toward the clamshell pier. The clamshell pier was a black skeleton against the churning, gray-black water. The storm was at its peak, the wind screaming, the rain so thick it was like walking through a solid beaded curtain of ice. He was there, Silas Dorn. He stood at the far end, under a single, harsh industrial floodlight that threw his shadow long and broken across the wet planks. He wasn't alone. He had 2 squads of men, maybe 10 in all, flanking him in dark, tactical rain gear. They looked ready for a war. Right on time, Dorn's voice boomed over the wind, amplified by a small speaker. He was holding a clipboard, a single sheet of paper protected in a plastic sleeve. I was just drafting the new menu for the Marigold. Miss Hart. I'm thinking less pie, more parking validation. He stepped forward, the wind tearing at his expensive coat. He held the paper out to me. A formality, a notice of seizure for the diner, based on the default of Mrs. Mays Aurelius Holdings loan. The Civic Shield Task Force is taking possession. Effective immediately. Sign it. I looked at the useless piece of paper. I looked at the dark, raging sea. I looked at Dorn. And I laughed. It wasn't a high, hysterical sound. It was the low, tired laugh I used when a customer tried to tell me a bad joke at 3 a.m. What's so funny, sweetheart? Dorn snarled. This, I said. I pulled my own phone from my apron pocket, the apron I wore over my blue dress, the apron that held my mother's rolling pin. This is just paper. The truth is a little bigger. My thumb was hovering over the Go Live button on the Wharf Ledger page. June, I whispered, so low only my comm could hear it. Are you ready? Scanned, packaged, and uploading. Her voice crackled in my ear, full of adrenaline. Light them up. Lila, now. I hit the button. You're live, Mr. Dorn, I said, my voice clear and loud, projecting past him. The whole city is watching, all 40,000 of them. A live stream, he scoffed. You think I care about your little blog? He stopped. A new light was cutting through the storm, a massive, bright light, flickering to life behind him, painting the clouds. He turned. On the side of the Port Harridan Tower, the giant electronic billboard that usually sold casino chips and cheap beer was now broadcasting my face. The tech team found a new feed, June whispered, her voice giddy with power. We're on the port billboard. Lila, we're on the billboard. The image on the screen split, my face on one side, on the other Dorn's black book, the ledger, the spreadsheets. The entire city could see it, line by line, the payments to the IIB, the slush fund for the Civic Shield, the direct laundered transfers to 2 sitting city council members, and at the top of every single page, the authorization Silas Dorn. His face, illuminated by the high-definition glow of his own crimes, went from arrogance to a pale, reptilian fury. You bitch! He screamed, his voice cracking. You're dead, both of you. Kill them now. He signaled his men. They raised their weapons. And then, from the black, churning water under the pier. They rose. One by one, silent, soaked, they hauled themselves up from the pilings, water streaming from their expensive, dark suits. 27. The harbor oath? They didn't draw weapons. They didn't run. They just appeared. They moved like shadows, forming a perfect, loose, disciplined circle around us, between us and Dorn's men. They just stood there, a silent, human wall. Dorn? Ronan's voice cut through the wind. He stepped forward, moving halfway between me and Dorn. He wasn't looking at the army. He was looking at his old friend. "It's over, Silas," Ronan said. "This is my city." Dorn shrieked, his composure shattered. "You should have stayed in the shadows. You should have let me have it." "I tried," Ronan said, his voice heavy, not with anger, but with that old, tired sadness. "I saved you once, on this pier, when we were kids. I can't save you from this." It was what he'd told me in the office. It was his final goodbye. Dorn snapped. He pulled his own weapon from inside his coat. "Fire!" he screamed at his men. "Fire, fire!" Just as he yelled, the deep, mournful, deafening blast of a foghorn tore through the harbor. It was a solid wall of sound, so loud it vibrated in my teeth, drowning out every other noise. In that instant, the harbor oath moved. It wasn't a gunfight. It was a disassembly. I heard sharp thwacks and snaps and grunts, all lost under the foghorn's blast. Ronan's men weren't shooting. They were disarming. They moved with a brutal, lightning-fast precision. They were aiming for wrists, for weapons, for balance. It was exactly what Ronan had promised. Disciplined, no killing, just ending it. In 10 seconds, it was over. Dorn's men were on the wet planks, groaning, their weapons skittering away or vanishing into the black water. Dorn saw he was beaten. His army was gone. His crimes were on a 50-foot screen for the whole city to see. He looked at the billboard. He looked at Ronan. And then he looked at me, at the phone in my hand, still broadcasting his ruin to the world. He didn't run. He lunged. He lunged for me, to stop the feed, to destroy the source. I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. I'd spent 10 years working the line. I'd spun out of the way of grabbing hands and clumsy drunks. He was just another one. As his hand grabbed for my wrist, I pivoted on my heel, just like my mother had taught me, using his own momentum against him. He overextended, stumbling. I brought my other hand up, the one holding my mother's rolling pin. I slammed the heavy, solid walnut end down, hard on his wrist. I heard a sharp, wet crack. He roared in pain, his weapon clattering to the planks. He wasn't finished. He came at me again, snarling, his good hand reaching for my throat. I was done being scared. I was done being protected. I blocked his arm with the rolling pin, the wood jarring against his bone, and used his own forward motion to spin him around, his back to me, slamming him against one of the thick pier pilings. I saw it, coiled on the piling, right next to me, a length of thick, nylon dock line. I wasn't a soldier. I wasn't a gangster. I was a worker. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the rope. I looped it, pulled the knot a quick, tight cinch, the one the fisherman had taught me when I was 17, to secure the cart. I wrapped it, pulled it tight, securing his good wrist to the piling. He was trapped, disarmed, tied to the pier. I stepped back, breathing hard, my phone still held high, still recording. The rain was easing, slowing to a cold drizzle, and through the mist, I saw the lights, the red and blue lights of the Port Harridan police, dozens of them. They were forced to come. But this time, they didn't stop. They didn't form a useless perimeter. They ran. The whole city was watching. Their own captains' names were on that billboard. They had no choice. They swarmed the pier. They cuffed Dorn's neutralized men. They uncovered the fake IUB badges, holding them up to the light, confused and angry. And finally, 2 officers approached Silas Dorn. Still tied to the piling, they looked at the rope. They looked at my rolling pin. They looked at me, a waitress in a ruined blue dress, holding a phone. They cut the rope and they cuffed him. The storm broke with the dawn. The light that came over Port Herdian was pale, weak, and clean. The Marigold Pie Diner opened at 8 a.m., just like always. Our first customers were already waiting outside. 27 men, in 27 identical, slightly damp black suits. They filed in, just as they had that first night. They took every seat. Mrs. May, her eyes bright and tears streaming down her face, was at the register. Ronan was standing outside, on the sidewalk, his back to the door. His new coat was soaked, the shirt underneath still stained with his own blood from the shipyard. He was just watching the harbor. I went out. I didn't say anything. I just stood next to him. The cold morning air felt good. I reached up, my fingers tracing the singed patch on his old coat that I'd seen on his back, the one he'd gotten protecting me. He turned. His harbor gray eyes were exhausted and clear, and I kissed him. It wasn't like the night at the Beacon. That was quiet. That was ours. This was for the city. This was on the sidewalk. It was a promise. It was an oath, sealed in the salty morning air. It wasn't a desperate, hungry grab. It was simple. It was solid. It was a claiming. This is mine. When I pulled back, he was smiling, a real, tired smile. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a thick, legal-sized envelope, miraculously dry. He handed it to me. "The harbor deed," he said, "finalized this morning. The Vescari Trust has acquired Mrs. May's old predatory debt. The Marigold Pie Diner is now, officially, the property of the Wharf Ledger Community Cooperative." I took the papers, my hands shaking. It was real. "I protected what was yours. Lila," he said, his voice low. "The diner, your home." He paused, his eyes holding mine, the vulnerability back, the exhaustion clear. "The rest I was hoping you'd protect me." I smiled, tucking the deed into my apron. "I think I can do that." I went back inside, all business. "All right, gentlemen," I called out to the sea of suits. "Coffee is hot, pie is fresh, one slice on the house, for luck." They all looked at Ronan, who nodded once. "The rest," I said, grabbing my order pad, "you pay for. We've got a lot of baking to do." Kindness didn't have to be a handout. Port Herdian woke up. The Interstate Integrity Bureau and the Civic Shield Task Force. They just evaporated. The news was running a 24-hour special investigation. The city council members were resigning for health reasons. The Oryx Circle's tentacle on this coast had been severed. Ronan didn't retire. He didn't vanish. He changed. 2 weeks later, the Vescari Trust announced the Small Business Harbor Fund, a permanent low-interest loan program for any wharfside shop, and he published the Harbor Oath Compact, a public, full-page declaration in the Chronicle. No protected business would be harmed. No livelihood would be burned. Anyone from any family who broke that rule lost their place at the table. That night, I was writing the last post for the Wharf Ledger. It was time to close that, too. I wrote, "A single piece of pie can be the linchpin that holds the whole machine of a city together." I gave it away for free, not because it was cheap, but because we have to be brave enough to give to each other. Kindness is the one currency that's always worth the price. I closed the laptop. The diner was quiet. Ronan was waiting by the door. He locked the deadbolt. I turned off the neon sign. He held out his arm. I didn't lean on him. I didn't melt into him. I took his arm, and I stood next to him, and together, side by side, we walked out into the clean, quiet night. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please comment below and let us know where you're listening from. We'd love to connect and share our thoughts. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to our channel, Mafia Boss Stories, and give this video a like. And if you really want to support us, please hit that hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.